but it's revealed in our language, these metaphors. And we've had some of them in the room already. So, for example, when we talk about knowledge as an insight, you've heard that term, insight? It may be in the literature, significant insight. There's a lot of literature about knowledge creation. When we're using insight, we're using a very particular kind of metaphor. Can you hear the metaphor in insight? Well, what's the suggestion there? What's going on? How are we understanding what we know?
The slight visibility into the concept of what knowledge in the concept.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's something to do with seeing something there. I think it was something you mentioned earlier on about the exercise this morning. It was seeing things in a different way. There's something very visual going on with this. And in fact, you probably said it yourself, if you have a conversation with someone and you're not quite sure what they mean, and then you realise what they mean, you might say, oh, I see what you mean. There's a very, very strong aspect of our understanding to do with knowledge, which is to do with seeing something. It's a very, very visual concept. And that's one of the things I play out here. And then there's this other set of understandings about knowledge, which is to do with objects, facts, theories. If I was to spend a bit of time unpacking these ideas with you, if I was to use an exercise with spend more time to get in, what would be revealed is that we're talking about knowledge as if it's a series of objects, as if it's a series of things that you can hold. You might even say, I really grasp that idea. Or you might say, I couldn't get a handle on that idea at all. Or you might say, I nearly got it, but then it just kind of slipped through my fingers. We use these kind of understandings to do with knowledge as a kind of object. Come across those terms? Does that make sense to you? And as I say, these aren't just accidents of language. These are because in the recesses of our cognitive process, we're using these mechanisms, these understandings of objects and things you can look at. And these objects of knowledge are also often characterized as being particular types. They're usually hard, actually. If you read the language around knowledge, there's usually a covert metaphor to do with these knowledge objects as being not only out there in visual space so you can see them, and not only ideally graspable, so you can grasp them, but they're also quite hard. They don't change over time, they don't flow away. They're stable, they're robust. This is the kind of language we use to talk about facts, isn't it? Robust facts. So all of those kind of metaphors are at play. And that's one of the starting points from this. And again, the literature is just full of that kind of language. But there is a problem with that. There is a problem with that, with several problems with it. Firstly, there's a problem with it because it only really works with certain kinds of knowledge. It really, really works well with empirical knowledge, scientific knowledge, knowledge that comes through highly rational processes, those kinds of things, problem solving, stuff I talked about before. That kind of process, scientific process, empirical process, logical process, or the creative process which are about solving problems, really lends itself to the creation of knowledge that seems to function like an object. Can you kind of imagine that? Yeah. You do an experiment and you use the fact, and the fact is a hard fact. And you know it's a hard fact, you tested it. And then you can give that fact to somebody else and they can look at it and then they can go away and test it. It exists like a hard object out there in visual space. So it's a bit of a problem for the sort of processes we make. We're involved in as artists. The kind of knowledge creation that we make doesn't result in hard knowledge. Doesn't make facts and theories. You can't put it out there in space and expect somebody else to pick it up and treat it exactly the same way. To the extent that we make objects and events at all, they're kind of strange and they move around and they're open to interpretation and all those kind of things. So it doesn't fit terribly well with that. So I started working on, well, what kinds of metaphors do work? What kinds of metaphors do work for arts practice? And what's the relationship between these different knowledges? It's not terribly satisfying to think there's one kind of knowledge for science and another kind of knowledge for art. That's not feel quite satisfying. So what's the relationship? And one of the things that comes through is that there are lots and lots of metaphors that understandings of knowledge do feature in the arts, but they don't use visual metaphors for a start. They tend to use either haptic metaphors, tactile metaphors. So we talk about how things feel. how things feel. It sounds like it's just language, but it's really thought we're talking about things. So we might talk about feeling things, how things make us feel.
Yeah.
Or we might talk about a gustatory metaphors, how things taste. So we might talk about art being a question of taste. We don't even think about using a metaphor when we say that, but we are. And it's completely parallel to the kind of visual metaphors that science uses gustatory taste metaphors and tactile feeling metaphors when we're talking about art. And there's a lot of consistencies between them. As I say, I won't go through the whole thing, that would take too long, but there's a lot of consistency in the range of different knowledges to stack around that. So when I was doing this, I kind of did analyse different kinds of things that are sometimes called knowledge, like occult knowledge, or carnal knowledge, or situative knowledge, embodied knowledge. These different types of knowledge forms kind of sit in that strange relationship of objects which have different kind of textures, which seem either hard or soft, and which are either far away and detached and distant, or up close and personal. Ones which we can only access through our eyes, and pieces of knowledge which we seem to be able to taste and feel. So that's the kind of general schema that I'm working with. Does that make sense? Or did it just sound like a problem now? Okay, so in terms of how that works, I'll just show you the site first, and then I'll explain why it's a site. This is a blog site. It's written with a blogging software called WordPress, and it's kept up for about 2.5 years, something like that. And as I say, it adds up to about 250,000 words, but there's other bits and pieces on the outside of that. And I'll tell you about the origins of this blog. That bit has to be useful, and then how that origin and the blog itself relates to what I've been talking about in terms of knowledge, and then how creativity falls out the back of that. I started doing my thesis some years ago, and how that worked, it was really hard doing it around the house. You probably find this yourself, you've got kids, you've got dogs, you've got responsibilities. Where the hell do you do your writing? So I started doing it while I was walking the dogs. I've got 2 dogs, Guy and Phoebe, take them for a walk every morning and in the evening. And I used to take notebooks with me. You may do the same. As you'll see the backstory of this part of the blog. So I take the dogs for walks and take notebooks with me and jot down any ideas about what might be something to do with knowledge, might fit into the thesis somehow, might be interesting to think about. But they're dogs, they don't like stopping, they don't like being waiting by the side of the canal like everyone knows. They want to keep going. So that was irritating. And also I kept losing the notebooks. I have no idea what the notebooks are now. They've lost them, got lost. So rather than do this, when I came back, I started typing up what I'd written instead. I made really, really sketchy notes, get back, and then desperately try to understand what I'd written whilst I was walking, so the dogs didn't get irritated. Started writing it down, and I kept a file on the computer. You've got used to this. Kept a file with lots and lots of scrappy ideas. Again, that's kind of fine, but I've had a lot of computer problems in the past. I thought, what if this file corrupts or how on the keyboard? I'm paranoid about this. And also, they just sit as files. It's really hard to know what to do with files. You can open them, you can read them, you can close them. It's just a bit passive. So that wasn't very satisfactory. So instead of doing that, I started keeping a blog. Initially on Blogger, which is a Google service, and then I built this one using WordPress. And that was fine. That worked quite well. But as it says there, I started to worry if my laptop crashed, I'd lose everything. And I was writing about knowledge, and I was writing about creativity, and I was writing about metaphors. But of course, because I was walking, I was with my dogs, and I was out in the landscape, I also found myself writing about trees, and about dogs, and about canals, and about lock gates, and how things work. That became part of the landscape of my own thinking, as well as the narrative focus, other stuff. And then I got a new phone, and so I thought I'll try the camera out. So perhaps this is a better way of doing it. So rather than make notes and irritate the dogs and all that, I'll just start filming myself and talk to the camera. That'll work, yeah. And then I can, just do that really. Then I'll put down somewhere, it'll be fine. And the way I decided to put them in the end was in here, which is a YouTube channel I uploaded.